Hello and welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Tom Noblett.
And me, Martin Johnson.
Hi Martin, how are you doing?
I'm good, Tom. How are you?
I'm good. I've had a nice weekend.
Yeah, boozing.
Humber Street sesh.
Yeah, it was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good.
It's good. I'm loving getting you in the podcast room, Tom, because usually you're the one behind the scenes editing and sorting out all of our faux pas and, making the podcast great. And today I said, right, Tom, because Tom does all our voiceovers, don't you, Tom, in terms of our T2 shorts and content.
Yeah.
So I thought, right, come and interview me on this topic, Tom, and you're up for it, right?
I am up for it, yeah. It's something I've actually been wanting to do for a long time, and I think it's I don't think there's a better chance to do it than with the CEO.
Are you nervous?
I'm not, I'm actually pretty comfortable. I don't know what that says about me or whatnot, but I think because I've seen so many people doing this podcast for so long, I think I'm just comfortable in this environment now.
Exactly, mate. We'll take it nice and easy, nice and organic, and I'm really looking forward to this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. So, what are we talking about today?
You tell me. Well, what we want to talk about today, I think, is what I would call our overarching methodology here at T2, which is the ultimate thing we are trying to help teams, individuals, and organizations achieve in terms of performance. Performance is an interesting word, isn't it? It's like, what does that mean, and what are the different types of performance modeling, and how does that play out? We have our own mantra here at T2, as you know, and everything we do is to try and help individuals, teams, and organizations deliver this type of performance. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So achieving optimal performance.
Yeah.
But also exploring other types of performance as well.
Yeah. Well, performance is an interesting word. I think if you just, for example, read social media, look online, research anything about performance modeling and what performance is, you'll end up with various terminologies. For example, we bucket them into three because there's so many different types of performance. But we bucket them into three different types of distinct performance models, all which have their place, for sure. But with the organizations and teams we work with around the world, two of these three performance models at times are highly unachievable, or they're completely disconnected from the actual realities of their environment and what they're trying to achieve. So
absolutely,
I want to try and debunk a bit of the buzzwords around them today and talk quite in depth around why we should be embracing optimal performance.
Yeah, so I thought, seeing as we published a recent paper on the T2 Hub pathway, it might be worth touching on that to start with.
Yeah, so it might be worth sort of going through the three main performance models, one by one, and then sort of seeing where optimal fits. So the first type of performance people talk about a lot is peak performance, and listeners listening to this will resonate with that term. There's quite a lot of peak performance this, peak performance that to achieve peak performance. And peak performance is great. And if you imagine what that looks like on a diagram, imagine a hill, a mountain, and you've got the flag at the top, and you want to peak or summit the mountain to get to the top, to the flag. And then once you've done that, once you've achieved that peak, you've got to come down the other side, right?
Yeah.
Well, as a performance model, peak performance is defined by when our team or individual wants to peak to the maximum of their performance at a certain point in time in the future, an exact point of time in the future. And in order to do that, your environment has to be highly controllable. It has to have low volatility. You've got to be highly resourced, low distractions. And it's all in this bid of peaking at a certain point, at the right point in time in the future, to achieve that level of outcome or performance. And, peak performance, therefore, doesn't describe very many environments that we work with.
No.
I mean, you tell me a business or a public sector organization or the military or whatever it might be where you have low uncertainty, where you're highly resourced, where you have low levels of volatility, high levels of control, and you can methodically plan to peak at a certain point in time with no distraction, right? There's very few environments that I've ever worked with where peak performance is achievable.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the only environment, let me give you a couple of examples where there's environments where peak performance is applicable, an Olympic program. So an athlete will prepare for 4 years to peak at 3:30 on the 5th of August, 2024. We've got the Olympics going on right now, haven't we? I don't know if you've been watching it. It's absolutely phenomenal. How inspiring is the Olympics?
Amazing. And GB are doing well, which is always a plus.
GB are doing well. The usual suspects are doing well. But you look at these athletes, right, and we're watching half an hour of them compete on a Saturday afternoon, which has been meticulously planned for 4 years.
Yeah, they're like finely tuned as well. Like their bodies are exactly adapted for that particular scenario as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for 4 years, what we don't see in that moment of performance on the TV, we don't see the sacrifice, we don't see the training regimes, we don't see the amount of people they've got supporting them and around the camp, the carefully managed nutrition. You talk about peak performance, you're talking about a cyclist, a runner, or a swimmer swimming 2 lengths of a pool, for example, right, for 10 minutes, and that's taken 4 years of planning to try and peak at that certain point in time. And so peak performance is, and ultimately I have no doubt when these athletes go away from the Olympics, they're absolutely physically and emotionally drained and they fall off a cliff the other end, right, and have some well-earned rested time. And I think peak performance, a lot of people talk about it in business and a lot of people get wrapped up in it in social media and all of these gurus and memes that go out there, and it's unachievable because I've never met a single team in an organization who have the same degree of certainty, control, highly resourced. They have all the distractions taken away from them, or as many as possible, and they've got to just peak at a certain point in time. That's not applicable for most teams and people out there. So I always say to people, if you're using the terminologies in your business of peak performance, just sense check what you mean by that and why you're using that. When are you asking people to peak? How many times are you asking them to peak? And how are you enabling them to do so? Just them 3 questions would probably make you feel very silly because it's incredibly hard to apply peak performance modeling in any other environment than some of the environments we discussed. Heavyweight champion of the world preparing for 6 months to fight for 12 rounds. You could argue they could apply the peak performance model. They train religiously, their nutrition is on, they take away lots of distractions, and they're aiming to peak at that certain point in time. Same with a marathon runner who trains for 12 months, tapers down in the last 4 weeks, all in a bid to have the mind and body absolutely peaking for 2 hours on that day.
You pretty much have to separate yourself from reality, don't you, really, just to get to that flag on the top of the hill.
Yeah. So the first model, Tom, is peak performance. And I stand up maybe more controversial, I don't know. What do I maybe stand up and ruffle a few feathers at conferences and talks when I say you need to forget peak performance. It doesn't describe the vast majority of environments and organizations we work with. It's not the right performance model.
Absolutely. So moving on, I think that takes us nicely towards optimal performance.
Yeah, optimal performance. So let's talk optimal. So what's the difference? So optimal performance occurs when a team or individual do the best they can with the resources they have in the moment. i.e. it's the most optimal thing I can do given the situation I'm in, the time I've got, the resources I've got at my disposal.
Right.
And if you look at the word optimal in the dictionary, Optimal means the best or most favorable solution at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just think about that for a second, you're not trying to peak. We're not even talking about high performance yet, which we'll come to next, because high performance gets banded around quite a lot as well. Optimal is a great word because optimal says that you will do your best or the most favorable thing that you could possibly do at the time. And what's really good about that is sometimes that will, so in the optimal performance model that we have on the hub and that we work with clients on, you've got like a steady heartbeat line going from left to right. And the top part of the graph is the flow area and the bottom half is drudgery. And the steady flow of performance can be in flow at times or drudgery and vice versa. And it can ebb and flow between the two. Flow is when everything's going right, when you're nailing it, when you're driving good outcomes, when you feel in control, and flow is great. It's like
high standards, productivity.
Yeah, good outcomes. So that's great, but that doesn't happen all the time. What happens when you drop into drudgery? Well, when you drop into drudgery, like we all do every single day and every week, is you're facing adversity, you have a challenge or a problem, things aren't going too well, something surfaces and you've got to respond and fix it. And sometimes that doesn't always feel sexy. It doesn't feel like high or peak performance. Sometimes you feel like you're papering over the cracks. If anybody's listening to this and you've ever gone away at the end of a day or week and you think, my God, we're doing it tough, or we're really keeping our heads above the water here, do you know what? You're in drudgery. But this is the thing about optimal performance. To perform optimally, which means to do the best that you can do in the time you are given with the resources you have. Sometimes that's going to feel like flow and great, and you've got to embrace those moments. And sometimes that's going to feel like you've literally put a few fires out and papered over the cracks. Yeah. It doesn't feel like good performance. The numbers aren't there. Whether it's in a sales target, your sales target is completely off for the quarter. You've been right behind target, your sales numbers are down, the results aren't there, but you're doing it in drudgery. Yeah. You're doing what you can, and you're pushing. So as long as in drudgery we are digging in and making decisions and taking action, that is okay. You are still on your journey of optimal performance. So this is making sense. The performance model we promote at T2 for most organizations and environments, given that we do have high uncertainty, we don't have all the resources under the sun, right? We can't be in control of everything all of the time. There is a lot of volatility. If that describes your organization, which I bet it does, then you have to embrace optimal performance.
Yep.
Otherwise, if you start going towards peak performance and high performance, and anything remotely happens which doesn't constitute those things, then you can feel like you're failing or you're on a downward spiral. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you give yourself the room to say, no, we'll do the best we can in the situation, given the time and resources we have, it doesn't knock you off track. You can move forward and we keep going towards our endeavor. So optimal performance is important for me, and I think it's the best that most teams and organizations can achieve.
So you mentioned high performance. I was just wondering if you could just go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so high performance is the byproduct of continuous optimal performance. So if you think about that statement, it says when individuals and teams form a habit of embracing flow and drudgery, when they get really good at knowing when things are going well and things are being achieved to a high standard and very naturally and organically, and then being able to dig in when times are tough and we're facing adversity, uncertainty, and challenge. If we form a habit of doing that, embracing optimal performance for a duration of time, and this is a really important bit, and we have a clearly defined flag on the hill of where we are heading and what success looks like, that is high performance. And if you don't have that flag on the hill, and let me explain what I mean by that if people are not familiar with that term. If you don't have an overarching goal and a clear definition of what success looks like and what the results and outcomes need to be and look like, then you can perform all you like optimally in drudgery and flow. But if you're rudderless and you don't know where you're heading, that is not going to constitute high performance. You are just going to be reactive, day-to-day, resolving issues, trying to perform, trying to deliver outcomes, but in what direction? So high performance occurs when a team or individual can maintain an optimal performance state and be bloody good in flow and drudgery for a sustained period of time whilst remaining aligned on the flag on the hill, the goal. And the reason that's important, and I say that, is because I visit organisations and teams, and a lot of them are genuinely performing against optimal performance. A lot of them are digging in drudgery. I bet there's people listening to this thinking, every day is drudgery for me, or every week is drudgery. Feels like I'm never out of it, right? So a lot of people are digging in. A lot of people are doing the best they can with the resources they have in the time they're given. But if the organisation and the leadership team are not clear on where we're heading and why it's important to dig in drudgery and how that contributes towards us getting nearer to our target, then it can feel soul destroying for people. It can feel like it's just a never-ending state of drudgery.
Right.
A thankless task,
So could that come down to the fact that that it's just it might help them if they remove themselves from that situation and sort of have a different perspective on things? Could just their perspective be altered slightly, or?
Yeah, if you aren't clear on where you are heading and what you're trying to achieve and why that's important, then if any human being spends too much time in drudgery, your resolve at some point is going to wane. Mm-hmm. Your commitment to the endeavour is going to reduce.
Yep.
Your patience is going to go. Your resilience will be tested because you just think, you've heard it before from people, what are we doing? What am I doing this for? What am I getting out of it?
Yeah.
Why?
It's about your purpose, isn't it? It's about like a goal.
Whereas if we coach people and we talk to people all the time, and when that flag on the hill and when that direction and goal, that mission is clearly defined and people are bought in because they feel passionate about it or they get it, you watch how resilient people get in drudgery. You watch how much they're willing to fight the fight and go through the tough periods because they remain aligned to what it is we're going to try and achieve and what it will feel like when we get there, and why it will be all worth it. I work with elite sports people, from Tour de France cyclists to footballers to rugby players, etc. And some of these people put themselves through hell. Yeah. And I mean, like no other human I've ever met on the planet. And what it is the flag on the hill is so clear. The potential prize at the end of it is such a strong pull that when they're in drudgery, I mean, in sports, sometimes they call it their ugly zone, which is quite a really good term. I like it, the ugly zone, when you're doing it tough and you're having to really dig in. But they're willing to do so more than the average human being because the end game is clearly defined and it's giving them purpose. And so if you ask me what high performance is, and it's funny because we listen to the high performance podcast with Damien and Jake.
Great podcast.
And Damien is featuring at our 2025 leadership retreat, as you know. He's going to be a great guest. But they always ask every guest at the start, how do you define high performance? And I listen to every single guest's answer intently. And I'm not saying there's any right or wrong. Everybody can define high performance in their own way, sure. But for me, if you was to ask me what high performance is, high performance occurs when a team or individual can maintain an optimal performance state for a duration of time whilst being remained aligned on the goal, the flag on the hill.
Yeah.
And if you do that and you get really good in flow and drudgery, ultimately you will achieve high performance.
Yeah.
But to say that high performance is relentlessly achieved through excellence, high standards, quality, perfection is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
If you think it's fundamentally flawed, and people become despondent with it because it doesn't describe their world.
No, like I look at like a team like Real Madrid, say, and they're probably like the most decorated team in Europe. I'm like, it doesn't feel real to even look at the amount of trophies they have or look back at their history. It doesn't compute in my mind because it feels like even that like they're setting the goals so high, so consistently and hitting them so often. It seems unachievable, like you say.
But what you see of Real Madrid is you see them play football for 90 minutes on a game.
Yeah.
They have quite regularly the best players on the planet, the best technicians of their sport on the planet. They play in a league where they're dominant. You know, the disparity between the quality, the setup, the facilities and budgets between the players in the teams in those leagues are huge, right? So but what you see generally could look like high performance every single week.
Yeah.
You go behind the scenes in Real Madrid on a weekly and daily basis, from the medical department to the conditioner to the nutritionist to the back office to the commercial function, whatever it might be. And I bet there are people scrambling around, you know, doing the best they can with the resources they have in the time they're given, trying to get players fit back on the pitch. The whole piece of the jigsaw is probably more optimal performance. And what they do is, because they're very good at it and they stay aligned, what you see as the byproduct, it ultimately is, at the end of a season, is results in high performance. Yeah. And you know, that's a very different world, for example, to say the NHS.
100%, yeah.
So we work, as you know, with the fire service, the police and the NHS. And I talked to a bunch of execs at an NHS recently, and I drew the modelling up on the board, and I drew peak, optimal and high. And I didn't explain anything to them, but I said to the execs of this NHS trust, I said, which model best describes your organisation? And straight away, without even hesitating, one of them said, well, definitely not peak. I mean, there's so many things you don't control. They're so under-resourced. Distractions, the challenging nature of their work means it's definitely not. And then they went, and it's definitely not high performance. I think we're optimal. And I went, I would agree you're optimal. I said, but I also would agree that over periods of time, you guys still achieve high performance. And they looked at me really puzzled. I was like, really? And I was like, yeah, because, you know, what you do is you are experiencing more drudgery than the average environment. That's all it is. So it feels like you're not driving high performance. You spend a large percentage of your time in drudgery. But if you look at it over a period, and if you look at the outcomes of what you guys achieve as a health service, yes, there's lots of things in the media and there'll be lots of things you can pull out where it's far from high. I said, but there will be areas and there'll be examples of where you're driving high performance. It's just because you're in the constant state of drudgery at times where it feels anything but that.
Yeah.
Feels anything but that. My wife works for the NHS, Tom. She does a 12-hour shift. Sometimes comes home, she's not even eating her lunch.
Yeah. They don't get time to breathe, like to even appreciate the moment where they'll go from drudgery.
Yeah.
As well, they don't get time to appreciate that. It's just straight back down.
Well, you don't give yourself any credits for drudgery.
Yeah.
So she'll do a 12-hour shift. They're understaffed. They're running around like headless chickens, and they're performing optimally, and they're digging in drudgery. And you'll come home at the end of a shift, and you'll go, I've not achieved anything, or it's not how I wanted to achieve things.
Mm-hmm.
I think these people are some of the most resilient people on the planet.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Because she works in midwifery. She still delivered babies successfully that shift. Mm-hmm. She still changed somebody's life. Mm. I mean, is that not high performance?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't feel like it to them.
No, you have to reflect on it. I guess you have to look back on it to really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because if you had actually did like a custom diagram of this state, you'd see the barely ever inflow.
It's a good point to make. Some people ebb and flow between flow and drudgery.
Yeah.
Some people spend more time in drudgery and then dip into flow once a blue moon.
Yeah.
Everybody's graph is different, but optimal performance model is the same.
Yeah.
At any point in time, in any day or week, we can go from flow to drudgery, and we can do it tough. And so, like my recent book, I Am Human, Pain and Pleasure. That's not a plug, by the way, but it is sort of, isn't it?
Yeah. Buy it now.
Yeah, buy it now on Amazon. My recent book, I Am Human, Pain and Pleasure. The whole concept of the book is me challenging people to think about we are catastrophizing at times basic human stress. We have always evolved from this ability to endure pain and discomfort and challenge and adversity, survival, and seek pleasure and reward, right? And we've always evolved and been successful as a species by doing that incredibly well. And we live in a modern day era now where we don't like to endure pain and discomfort. We've created this world for us which is incredibly comfortable, which is, we live in a world of abundance. And when we do encounter stress, duress, pain, discomfort, we don't seem as able to sit in it and work our way out of it as quick. And so if you think about optimal performance, and we're saying to do that well, you've got to be good in the good times of flow, but you've also got to dig in drudgery. You match that with society's current situation of not being good themselves in pain and discomfort, means that if we're not willing to embrace this drudgery and get ourselves out of it and understand what it is, then we ain't going to be able to perform optimally. And if we can't perform optimally for a sustained period of time, we're going to struggle to deliver high performance and get the rewards at the end of it when we've dug in and got ourselves there. So I think it's really important to understand the difference in these models. And it's so easy now to talk about high performance this and peak performance that. And we set such high bars for ourselves that we totally are neglecting the one key thing that we all need to experience to be able to truly achieve performance, which is we need to dig in when it's not going too well.
Yeah. So do you think it's important that we experience each state, high, peak and optimal performance? Do you think it's important that we experience all three?
Yeah, I think so. I think peak performance, as we established, I'm not saying organizations and teams can't embrace peak performance. For example, there might be a project in the business where a small team assembles and they have 3 months to deliver this project. Everything else is taken away from them. They get highly invested in and resourced. And it's like, right, you've got to go and deliver that. I'm not saying that can't exist in pockets, but I think it's very rare. I'd say optimal performance is what everybody experiences 99% of the time.
Yeah.
Got to be. But I guess the biggest question, Tom, is how do people experience high performance? How do they know when ultimately all these efforts have resulted in a high performance outcome? Well, one of the biggest ways that you achieve that is being able to be recognized for the outcome that was clearly defined in the first place.
Yeah, you can't trust your perspective on it necessarily. You need that reassurance or like feedback from people.
Well, there's two elements to it. It needs to be clearly defined in the first place. So you've not stumbled across something by chance or it's just happened. So how are we defining this high performance outcome in the first place? So organizations, teams and leaders who do a great job of that early doors already make it possible for people to experience high performance. But most importantly, when we get to that point in time or when we've achieved certain outcomes and results of a certain standard or nature, being able to do a great job of the recognition piece, the celebration piece, because sometimes people feel it themselves, sometimes they don't. Going back to a sports outcome, if you win the race or the game, it's very clear to define if that's been successful or not. Yeah. Yes, you might go back and unpick your performance level, and some of it might be drudgery and some of it might be flow, but overall the outcome was achieved. But in businesses and in teams, for example, unless workers and team members have visibility, which they don't, of metrics and results, they don't always know how overall we're performing. And what the best leaders do is not only do they clearly define what that looks like at the beginning, but they absolutely share that success and communicate and recognize the people who contributed when we do achieve the outcomes.
Yeah, so you don't have to be close to finance to understand the finances. You don't have to be close to the consultants to understand what they're doing. It's an open forum kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is the other myth. High performance is not always enjoyable performance. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, I always ask people this question: have you ever finished a year at work, no matter what your job is, or you finished a quarter or a period or whatever it might be, and you retire to your holiday or your Christmas break or summer break, whenever your end of year is, mm-hmm. and you think, we got there, we did it, but I need a break, I'm knackered. It was tough. Because sometimes you've had to go through that much of drudgery to get there, and you got there, but you didn't enjoy it. You are mentally and physically drained. You sort of are in that depleted state of dopamine where you're struggling to embrace and enjoy it as much as you should. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've spoken to people in all different environments and industries. Sometimes the sports stars who have reached the pinnacle of their sport, and they feel so flat afterwards. Yeah. They struggle to enjoy and celebrate in the flag on the hill result at the end of it, because what they've had to endure mentally and physically, or the problems and adversity they've faced to get there, has taken such a toll that they struggle to enjoy it.
It consumes their lives, I guess, to a point, doesn't it? So when that's removed, it's it's an alien feeling, I guess.
And everybody in every walk of life can resonate with this. And sometimes high performance feels amazing. Sometimes because you've been embracing optimal performance for a while, but let's say for a large part of the journey, you was in flow. Yeah. As in, it was exciting work. We had great times. We delivered to a high standard. Everything went quite swimmingly. We had a couple of drudgery moments, but nothing too major. And they were definitely fleeting and periodic. But the vast majority of the experience was flow. Mm-hmm. Like when you reach the outcome, that's going to feel incredibly rewarding, and you aren't going to be physically and mentally as drained. No. Right? So depending on the optimal performance graph to get there, how much time you had to spend in drudgery versus flow will depend on how much enjoyment you have at the end of it, how much the experience felt like a high performance experience at the end of it. So I always say to people, high performance occurs as a result of continuous optimal performance, as long as the flag on the hill is clearly defined and we get there. But that can feel very different from one person to another, or from one team to another. You know, sometimes football teams say their title winning season was an amazing one. Mm-hmm. The Arsenal Invincibles always talk about it being the greatest season of all time. And not only was it great, but they enjoyed themselves. They played good football. They were amongst great people. They didn't have many injuries and much adversity. Whereas you could look at Alex Ferguson's 2008 Premier League win, one of his last ones before. They were barely patching a squad together. No, they were doing it tough, winning in the last minute, coming back from adversity. It was probably potentially one of the biggest achievements, but from an enjoyment factor week to week, was it as much? Who knows? The point I'm making is everybody's journey to a high performance outcome can feel drastically different. And fundamentally, that is governed by how much time you spend in drudgery versus flow and the personalities of the people involved. Because we're getting into depth here, Tom, but some people are built for drudgery and love it.
Yeah.
Some people listening to this go, I need a bit of drudgery in my life to come alive.
Yeah.
When the shit hits the fan and the chips are down, I roll my sleeves up and that's where I come alive. Yeah. And some people go, I don't need too much drudgery. I can handle moments and periods, but I need to feel like periods of flow as well.
Maybe they need to experience more drudgery to see if they can handle it, because maybe they've only experienced a comfortable amount of it, if that makes sense.
Well, everybody's resilience threshold is different, so, and as we know from the profiling and wiring, so, but yeah, I think peak, optimal, and high are the three ones. I always try and disregard peak, mainly because in many environments, it's a different model, it's unachievable, and it's not really the right performance model. I think everybody ultimately wants high performance.
Yep.
But remember, that's the byproduct of continuous optimal performance. And if you think about that, then optimal performance is the only one which moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, reflects the reality of the world and situations that we are thrust in. So get good in drudgery would be my tip.
Is there any other takeaways that you think the listener must take away with them above all else?
Well, I think my last comment there was get good in drudgery. And I guess, what are some of the things we observe in humans that make them good in drudgery? I think number one, you need an awful lot of courage for drudgery. I think understand what courage is as well. Courage is not the absence of fear. That's the biggest mistake people make. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's your ability to step into difficulty, danger, or uncertainty despite it. My son always says to me, whether he's playing football, rugby, whatever, I'm scared. And I say to him, good, you should be. It's normal. It's normal to have that. It doesn't mean to say you don't have courage. It means you need to be able to step into those situations despite feeling scared. That's courage. Yeah. So, when drudgery happens and when things aren't going well in a team or in an environment, the chimp can be activated, survival mode can kick in, and consequence is on the table. Having the courage to acknowledge all of that and step into the situation, first and foremost, it requires courage. So that's the first thing. Once you've stepped in drudgery, you need durability. Durability is your ability to stay in discomfort for a period of time beyond the pain threshold, the brain's pain threshold. So when you're going, oh my God, this is awful, I want to get myself out of here, this is not working, bail out, your durability comes to the fore where you go, no, I'm going to sit in this, right, because we need to see it through. You need to calm your system. This is what we do with the chimp. So I'm acknowledge the chimp, ABC it, get back into a state where you're going to stay in it. You need resilience. I think resilience is after the event of a drudgery situation, it might feel you'll reflect a lot.
Yep.
It might feel awful. You might go, don't want that to happen again, or this is failing, or this is feeling bad. Resilience is your ability to get yourself back to your emotional baseline state. Mm-hmm. Calm the system, don't catastrophize it, don't dwell upon it. Let's get back to baseline state and let's go again. So it's almost like your bounce back ability after the exposure. If courage puts you in something that, that is pressurized or carries uncertainty or would constitute drudgery, durability is your attribute you're leaning on to stay in it. Mm-hmm. And then after the exposure or the event, resilience is don't dwell upon it or let it put you off. Get back to your baseline, even keel, and let's go again. Which probably leans into the last one, which is persistence. The persistence is to try time and time again, despite delay in achieving an outcome. So once you've got yourself back to baseline, persistence says, right, let's have another crack at this. Yeah. Let's keep going. And if you have courage, durability, resilience, and persistence, or you can start practicing them or embracing them more, when you hit drudgery, you'll have what it takes to see you through. Mm-hmm. And remember, it still won't feel like flow. It still won't feel like you're doing your best. It will feel like you're firefighting. It will feel like you're papering over the cracks, like you're barely keeping your head above water. But you'll be making decisions and taking action and continuing on your journey. And that's the key part of optimal performance.
Fantastic. So is there any final words before we finish up this podcast today, Martin?
Well, I would just say we've covered a lot in a short space of time. I guess the main things I'd like people to consider is performance modeling is important to understand. If you are already driving language such as peak performance and high performance, I'm not saying that's wrong. Just understand what you mean by it. Understand the environment you have, the objectives you're trying to achieve, and just sense check that performance modeling is the right one. And if not, it gives an opportunity for you to consider optimal performance and completely reframe what you want your people to embrace. Because I think when I work with teams and individuals, the moment they start to really connect with this is when it normalizes real life situations. It absolutely says to them, first of all, it describes their environment, drudgery and flow. And second of all, it says to them, it's okay to be in drudgery. In fact, it is absolutely necessary to perform in drudgery in order to deliver outcomes. It's not all good all of the time. We don't have all the resources we would like all the time. So they sort of drop the shoulders and take a deep breath and go, you know what, I can work with that. If my leadership team and my organisation say to us, you're going to go through periods of drudgery. We don't expect you to be high performing all the time. We don't want you to peak every single day. What we want you to do is do the best you can with the time you've got, with the resources you are given. Yes, we want standards. Yes, we want to drive ultimately high performance outcomes. But if we embrace optimal performance on an ongoing basis and we get really good in drudgery, guess what? We'll spend less time in it and we'll be able to achieve our outcomes as long as that flag on the hill is clear. So I want people to understand the definitions and start thinking about what's the most relevant performance model for their team or their organisation. I think that's the first thing. And second thing, I want people to think about how they perform personally in drudgery. Some of us come alive. Some of us love a good crisis, right? Others, maybe only a few every now and then. Others sometimes do the opposite and they capitulate in a crisis or under pressure. It's perfectly fine. We're all different and we're all human. However, if you aren't that good in drudgery, or you're perceiving moments of drudgery in a negative way, then use this to maybe reframe that a little bit.
Yeah.
Certainly if you're a leader. I think leadership is not needed in the good times. In flow, who needs leadership? The team are flowing. Everything's been delivered. Teams need leaders in times of drudgery. So we got to know what it looks like. We've got to make it okay. And we've got to assemble as a team and make sure we dig in it. So I'd like people just to think about that, because there's too much out there, Tom, now, which, it's confusing the true reality of what performance looks like. There's far too much peak and high this. There's far too much onus on perfection, and it just puts pressure on people, or it makes people feel like they're in an environment that's failing. It's not. You're just probably in a high drudgery environment doing it tough.
Yeah.
I guarantee those people have more resilience than some of the so-called high flyers ever will, right? So we've just got to normalize it and appreciate. And great leaders are really good at recognizing the drudgery stuff as well. Not just the true flow, high performance stuff, but when someone's dug in and shown some tenacity and patched over a problem, but they've done it and they made the call and they didn't back away from it, that doesn't get enough recognition for me.
No.
And so I think we've got to be better at rewarding and recognizing moments of drudgery as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I want people to think about. And hopefully, Tom, it's useful.
And for anyone who might want to explore a bit further into some of the things we've spoken about, I'll make sure I put some more like supplementary podcasts in the show's notes as well. I'll give some links and some podcast episode titles because I'm fairly certain we've done some other things in regards to certain things we've touched on today.
Yeah, we've done loads on resilience and some of the other attribute stuff, so we can post links to them as well.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Martin.
Thanks, Bear.
And we'll see you again soon for another T2 Hubcast.